with Representative Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. I'm Deb Sanderson. I represent District 88, which is Chelsea, Whitefield, Jefferson, and part of Noblesboro.
Senator Chris Johnson, representing Senate District 13, the Mid-Coast, ranging from Monhegan, 12 miles offshore, to the inland towns of Windsor, Somerville, and Washington.
Good morning. I'm Anne Marie Stracchio. I represent House District 18, which is part of the New Sanford.
Good morning. I'm Chuck Kruger from Thomaston, House Chair of this committee, and representing Thomaston, St. George, South Thomaston, Cushing, and Crehaven, Vinyl Haven, and St. Thomas, St. Croix, and St. John.
Good morning. Ms. Paul Davis. I represent Senate District 4, which is all of Piscataquis County, and towns in both Somerset and Mount County.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bill Diamond, live in Wyndham, and I represent Newman, Raymond, Pasco, Standish, Baldwin, and Long Island.
And good morning, I'm Representative Mike McClellan. I live in Raymond, and I represent House Seat 66, which is parts of Raymond, Castro, and Poland.
I'm Dick Campbell. I represent District 130, which is Bucksport, Orrington.
Thank you. I'm Roger Cates. I represent Augusta, China, Oakland, Sydney, and Vassaro in the State Senate. And we're also honored to have with us today a couple of members from the Labor, Commerce, Research, and Economic Development Committee, including our fine chair, Senator.
Good morning. I'm Senator Amy Holt from District 30, which is Scarborough, Gorham, and Buxton. You had it. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, no. My name is Paul Gilbert. I represent House District 74, the towns of Jay, Livermore Falls, and Powder Livermore.
Thank you. And that's right. Thank you very much, Beth, for reminding me that some of us are extra special here, and that includes Representative Mastracchio, who is not only a member of this committee, but also of the Elkhart Committee. And we also welcome our Director, Beth Ashcroft, who's here, and our fine staff, Etta Connors, who's also here. And I'd also like to welcome anybody who might be listening in around the state, from Biddeford to Brunswick to Ellsworth and all points in between. And we're going to start this morning by taking a matter out of order under unfinished business, and that's number 6 on our agenda: review status of open recommendations from OPEGA's 2006 report on economic development programs in Maine, and in particular the department's response to outstanding actions as of April of 2015. And we're very happy that Commissioner Gervais has been able to join us this morning. We know he only has, I think, about an hour to spend with us before another commitment, but Commissioner, we're glad you're here, and why don't you come join us? Thank you, Commissioner. And maybe the easiest place to start is to ask if you have some general comments you'd like to make about the OPEGA recommendations from the original 2006 report, and any context you'd like to set for us before we begin the discussion. And again, thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's good to be here because I did listen in on some of the other committee meetings. It's coming out of my chair on a few occasions, so I'm so happy to be here to respond. I think I'd rather start with just reading through my comments, because I think my general opinion about some of the questions and some of the answers will be covered there.
Thank you.
So again, thanks for having me here today. I'd like to start by giving a little background on the department, for those who may not be quite as familiar with the department. In 2004, DECD had a total of 43 positions, which is 10 more positions than we have today. In fact, DECD had nearly 90 positions in the late 80s. Today, they're just over 30. The general fund budget of the department has faced cuts over the years, and this most recent budget is no exception. The DECD general fund budget now represents roughly 0.3% of the total general fund budget. Within our department, you will find the Office of Tourism, the Office of Community Development, where the Community Development Block Grant Program is administered, the Office of Business Development and Innovation, President of the Maine Technology Institute, President of the Maine International Trade Center. In addition to that, when SPO was disbanded, we took on Code Enforcement Training and Certification Program and oversight of the state landfills, which may seem a couple of odd fits for our department, but that's where they landed. We did have 2 positions that came with that additional responsibility. So we'd be more than happy to discuss with any committee what other roles and responsibilities the department could take on, but I think we all need to understand that additional workload could not be successfully undertaken within our existing staffing levels. A review of the state's economic development programs has been constant discussion over the years among several different departments. Several different committees. And gaining access to the data in order to produce valuable reports has been hindered by confidentiality statutes. It's certainly been challenging. But given the security issues today, we need to be very careful about how we approach that problem. And I know we're discussing access to data and who should have that responsibility today, but given everything that is challenging in the technology world, with data breaches around the world, confidentiality of data and security of our state systems is absolutely more critical today than ever before. I agree with the need to assess these programs. I always have, and I've always been vocal about that. But without assessment, we certainly cannot truly determine a program's success, nor maximize Maine's competitive advantage when compared to other states. But this data collection process has to be a well thought out process. If confidential data is placed in the wrong hands, it can have a negative impact on the way we do business. So we do intend to increase the response rate to improve the quality of data we receive for the production of the comprehensive economic development evaluations and the research and development evaluations for the upcoming 2016 versions of these reports, while also respecting the confidentiality of the data we seek. We step back to 2011. There was a report called A Brief History of Time that was produced by the Office of Fiscal and Program Review relating to evaluating economic development programs. This report focused on efforts that went back to 1997. In addition to the access to data issue that has also been constant, this report highlighted the legislative efforts and challenges to fund an economic development evaluation report. The original funding formula contained a decimal point error that was later adjusted in statute. However, given current budgets, this still falls far short. Please note that the initial 2008 Comprehensive Economic Development Evaluation Report was funded by the legislature in the first year it was required. The lack of funding for the Comprehensive Economic Development Evaluation Report had resulted in a gap after 2008, up until we tackled it in 2014. The assessment for the research and development evaluation has been successful in generating funds necessary to cover the cost of the third-party independent review of research and development activities in the state. Again, we have always agreed that evaluations of these types are necessary to ensure programs are functioning, both individually and as a whole, to create a climate that enhances Maine's competitive standing, both nationally and globally. We also agree that economic development and research and development programs should be evaluated in one report or in one effort. Statute requires separate reports currently. I will say that for 2016, we are testing a combined version of presenting the data, being careful to keep intact the ability to also report separately. Changes to existing statute would be necessary to effectively combine the comprehensive evaluation of economic development programs and research and development programs. A combined evaluation would be less costly than conducting these two separately. To be clear, again, DECD is continuing with its statutory and contractual obligation to produce the comprehensive evaluation of states' investments in economic development and comprehensive evaluation of state investments in research and development by February 1 for 2016. And of course, we did complete the 2014 evaluations. Those were completed by a third-party independent source, and those were distributed to the legislature. Public Laws of 2015, Chapter 344, provides OPEGA with the authority to review tax expenditure programs on an individual staggered basis. Tax programs are only part of the suite of programs contributing to the economic vitality of the state. Recommendations over the years have consistently emphasized the requirement for a third-party evaluation of programs. An independent review provides an evaluation and recommendations which are non-biased and non-political. The comprehensive economic development evaluation and the research and development evaluations provided by DEC are developed and written by an independent third party. We cannot answer why repeated recommendations of different third-party evaluators over the year have not been addressed. The 2014 evaluations were presented to the Joint Standing Committee on Appropriations and Financial Affairs on February 27 of 2014. The chairs and members of the Labor, Commerce, Research, and Economic Development Committee, the Taxation Committee, the Workforce and Economic Future Committee, and the Government Oversight Committee were invited to this presentation. I feel it's important that when these reports are presented, that as many committee members from these different committees hear each other's questions to the evaluator in context and the answers in context to fully understand what's in these reports. So we contracted a third-party evaluator, Investment Consultant Associates. They presented findings and recommendations with assistance from a steering committee which was created, which included State Senators Emily Kane and Andre Cushing, Brian Whitney of DECD, Steve Levesque from the Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority, Peter Del Greco of Maine and Company, and Bob Martin from the Maine Technology Institute, Jake Ward from the University of Maine, and Luann Ballesteros from the Jackson Lab. They were on either weekly or bi-weekly, depending on the conference calls, to discuss the progress and offer input on the production of these reports. DECD is required to report the findings and recommendations of the third-party reviewer to the legislature and governor. OPEGA, pursuant to PL 2015, Chapter 344, must report to the Joint Standing Committee on Taxation. This may cause an unexpected barrier as to which committee of jurisdiction, if any, should be reviewing the recommendations as they relate to Maine's overall economic development programs, which include tax expenditure programs. There is likely to be a duplication of effort here as well, unless OPEGA does not intend to report on any of the programs that DECD, to an independent third party, is already charged with reporting on. While individual review of programs can provide a more in-depth analysis as to the effectiveness of an individual program, we cannot lose sight that it is the suite of programs available that is critical. Any evaluation of tax expenditure programs conducted in Public Law 2015, Chapter 344 should complement the overall independent third-party biennial evaluations. In addition to reporting on the state's many economic development programs, we strive to have a team in place to understand all of the programs available. And when I mean all the programs available, I mean whether or not they are state programs, federal programs, local programs, or private programs. This team is within the business development arm of DECD, called the Account Executive Team. They're a team of 4 who act as the conduit for all of state government when a business requires help. Their role is both to react when needed and to promote through proactive outreach. They also act as coordinators between the many programs regardless of being state-run or otherwise. Each interaction with a business or organization results in a unique set of circumstances, and this team helps make connections between all the relevant programs, agencies, and organizations to see a project through or to help overcome challenges. With well over 26,000 small businesses in Maine, this is one very busy team. I'd like to move on to some answers provided to questions we received. I'm going to start with the second set of questions, and then I'll address the first set. So we're on page 7. So with regard to the Pine Tree Development Zone report, the request that we produce the reports for 2009, 11, 13, and 15. Page 7 would be the red numbering on the bottom of the pages.
Thank you.
So on the following pages, you will find the reports that were turned in to the Labor, Commerce, Research, and Economic Development Committee as required on April 1st for 2013 and 2015. Those were the years reports were due since I have been commissioner. We had, I think, up to 4 staff members searching everywhere, including electronic files and paper files, looking for what happened in 9 and 11. We did not call the committee clerk to find out if something had in fact been turned in, but we could not find anything in our own records that indicated anything had been turned in for those 2 years. But I can assure you that since I've been commissioner, we have been turning in those reports. I'd like to speak for a minute before I get to the second half of that question about that report. But there seems to be an expectation that that report include what's in Title 5, 13070, which is the evaluation of economic development proposals and that long list of criteria. I'll first read what 5250P of Title 30A says about reporting on the Pine Tree Zone program. And it reads, I'll skip to the important part, that by April 1st of each odd-numbered year thereafter, the Commissioner shall report to the Joint Standing Committee of the Legislature having jurisdiction over economic development matters on the status of the Pine Tree development zones. So I believe, in keeping reports as simple and concise as possible, making sure that you have the data and not give you 40 pages of text, because I want to make sure that the data is received. When I look at Title 5, 13070, which is the evaluation of economic development proposals, at no time have we ever interpreted that to mean those criteria should be reported on within the Pine Tree Zone report. So when it was asked of me why we weren't doing that, that was a bit of a surprise. I did, however, in searching for what communications have gone on over the years between the department and OPEGA, I did find that on January 28th of 2008, that all of the recommendations that were asked to be reviewed were reviewed at the time by Commissioner Richardson was there at the time, and that there evidently was a commitment made that they would do that. I was completely unaware of that, and we are following what statute requires us to do, which is produce a report on the Pine Tree development zones. So that's my explanation as to why you do not see the criteria. I do not read an evaluation on pending proposals to mean we need to address those criteria on existing programs.
I just interject there? The Commissioner is exactly right. What happened back in that juncture was, there was an agreement that the upcoming report that was due would, for one time and one time only, give a read on whether the program itself included those criteria. And that's what never transpired. I don't think we envisioned that it was going to be in every report, but we just never had seen a report where it was addressed. But it was meant to be a one-time thing, and it was something that Commissioner Richardson agreed to. So vouch for that scenario there.
Yeah, and within that 2008 document, I mean, we had spent a lot of time trying to dig into the history of these recommendations, what the expectations were of the department. And I'll get into this later, but in that letter to OPEGA, it seemed clear that at the time, 2 years after the 2006 report was released, the department had met, or at least communicated, I don't know if it was agreed upon at the time, but communicated that the department had met all of the requests of OPEGA at the time. So I'll return to that in a few minutes.
Commissioner, thank you, and please continue your presentation. I know you're on a little bit of a short time frame here.
I'm going to stretch it if I have to.
Okay, that's fine. I
If
just wanna
that's
make-
okay with you.
That's fine. I just want to make sure we leave, I'm sure there are going to be some questions from the group. I just want to leave time for that as well. Thank you.
Actually, we just discussed most of that. But the second half of what I want to discuss with regard to the answer to A is I'd like to move you ahead to page 12. What I've done here is I've pulled out, I'll give you an example of what's in the Comprehensive Economic Development Evaluation Report that we completed through a third-party independent evaluator and submitted to the legislature in 14. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about the Pine Tree Zone program and the importance of really reading the entire report and what happens when we put too much text in. So page 12 just gives background on the program for anyone who's not familiar with it. I'm going to skip over that for a moment. Page 20 shows the first chart, which they use a cost-benefit analysis and an internal rate of return concept.
Page
13, what did I say?
20.
Oh, sorry. Page
It's also-
13.
it's also
Yes,
page
red.
20.
Yes. People always look at the red, and I need to do the same. So you'll notice there's an internal rate of return on this incentive program that's highlighted. It says negative 22.4%. And a lot of people jump to the conclusion that this program has been a disaster because of that. Now, you see the section where it says important consideration, and where I've highlighted where it starts critically. That simply talks about the but-for language in statute. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about how effective the but-for statute is. But a company essentially has to claim in writing that but for the benefits of this program, they would not be moving forward with the project. So, the evaluator recognized a couple things. One, that if you accept that every single project would not have moved forward but for the availability of the Pine Tree Zone program, then turn to the next page, page 14 in red. That would be applying a sensitivity index of 0, which means we're assuming 100% of the companies are telling the truth, and that but for the program, they would have come. That gives us an internal rate of return of 125% on this program. So then, given all the discussions around the but-for clause, first, we have to assume that 100% of the companies lied to us to land at that negative 22 number. Even if we assume that half the companies lied to us about the availability of this program being the only reason they moved ahead with their project, we are still at a 30% positive IRR. So I point this out because when you turn to the next page, first there's an explanation on the cost-benefit analysis and how they arrived at these conclusions. Now skip over to page 17. You notice the 17 has to the right the number 2 on it. It was page 2 in the report. It was part of the executive summary. How many reports do you all receive where the executive summary is as far as you get? And this was 160 some odd pages, this report. So if you read the executive summary, you find this bullet that says, while the Pine Tree Development Zone program receives significant praise from public and private sector interviewees, preliminary cost-benefit analysis shows the program is very costly to the state of Maine. So you go forward to find the chart that shows a negative 22%, and we started getting phone calls. But this is why I try to keep anything we provide out of the department as simple and concise as possible. The more we provide, it seems like the more confusion that occurs. Sorry for that explanation. Had to do that.
Yes, Representative Strachio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming, Commissioner. I
No
really
problem.
appreciate it. I was actually at that February meeting when the preliminary report, that's what was told to me, that it was a preliminary report and the official report would then be presented because there were questions that were asked about those very issues. You're right. We had people all around the horseshoe, and those were the kinds of things that that jump out at you. But that was the preliminary report, and I guess my concern was that those issues, those are the kinds of things that we need to address, because if we're making decisions based on reports, then we need to see the final report and hear a presentation. And then I just think that those questions have never really been answered, and there were issues around Pine Tree Zones, and there will continue to be until we have a complete evaluation of the program, in my mind. And I guess this was just a piece of what we were looking at in a big report that I don't think ever really got enough attention, because I think that because we want the best programs that we can have that can attract businesses, and we don't want them to be always on the chopping block at the time when we're doing a budget without full understanding. So I guess that I was there, I listened to the report, and it was a preliminary report, and I don't know that I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember ever being at a place where the final report was presented.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure where preliminary report came from. I know it's not, I have my testimony from that day with me. It's not in, the department did not consider that to be a preliminary report. We did have another report that came in June as a follow-up, but that was a part of our RFP. It was a one-time evaluation of how Maine stands in competition to other states when you take into consideration the R&D report and the Comprehensive Economic Development report, both of which were submitted to the legislature and presented on the day you're discussing. So I don't know how to talk about whether that's preliminary or not. It has never been preliminary in my mind. That was the final report. And that was one of the 4 programs that the evaluator dug into deeply, and that is a complete picture of the Pine Tree Zone report. On that particular program, we got a response rate from companies of 79%. And I consider that to be a pretty successful rate of response when we are seeking input from a company that currently is not compelled to report. But we felt it important to understand, and we happen to administer that program, so we have the relationship with the companies, and we're able to get at that data through cooperation of the companies. So I do consider what's within the January Comprehensive Economic Development Evaluation Report, specifically on Pine Tree Zones, to be a complete report, and I think you can be comfortable in making judgments on the program based upon that.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I remember the individual from the company that was giving the report, and I remember him saying that some of this information we have not completed, looking at all the information, and that was the whole point of that we're doing this now. It was we knew that the legislature was only going to be there through April. I think it was really an attempt to get things in, but my understanding from their mouths was, not from you, from them, that it was not the complete report, because they had discussed the fact that a lot of the information that they had gotten back was not complete, or they hadn't gotten enough information, so that and that's why some of the information was actually different in the final report than in what was presented then. And I'm just, that's how I remember it. I'm not saying that I have this photographic memory, and I'll admit that that day I actually was pretty sick. I sat there and I think I blew my nose the whole time. So, but I was there, and it was really important to me, and I guess I looked for that final report, wanting to have a chance for LCRED to discuss it in maybe a different venue, so we could really get more deeply into the subject. But that's where it came from me, listening to the person say that this is not the final report.
Let's go ahead, continue.
Question B, on the second set of questions. So we're talking about the policy coordinator, which is described in the 2006 report. This is on page 18, sorry. So the question was asked, what resources would we need to take on this role? What elements of that role, if any, would be difficult or unworkable to unfill, and what statutory changes would be needed? I'll start with saying I did, this past week, in our Digging for History, stumble across a proposal that was, again, going back to that January 28, 2008 time period, that was submitted by then Commissioner Richardson to the committee, that was not acted on. So a proposal was submitted about the policy coordinator position. Although when I read the submission, I have to say I don't agree that we'd be able to pull off what was submitted. I guess we probably should have a discussion about what the policy or portfolio coordinator is expected to do. I guess I looked at the account executive team in gaining access and making sure people understand it, and making sure our team understands what all of the economic development tools are available to everybody in the state. That's part of what they do. So there's 4 people that are currently working in the department. But what they don't do is they don't, as part of their job, collect data and prepare for that comprehensive economic development and evaluation report. That's a piece that's still left unaddressed, and I don't know if within existing resources we could pull somebody off what they're currently doing to tackle that problem. We would need additional resources for that. I couldn't speak at this point. We haven't done the analysis to say exactly what that would mean. I suspect it would be at least a person in the 2008 proposal put by at the time. They indicated it could be a part-time contract position. I would tend to think that would be a state and for the department for a full-time position to do that. Letter C. This asks about what resources we would need to collect data and what authorities we would need to collect data. I think you've probably heard a response rate of 30% overall on the Comprehensive Economic Development Evaluation Report. That's across all programs. And most of those programs aren't within our department. I got a kick out of the Portland Press Herald story that ran last night talking about this discussion going on today in the committee room. A number of facts that weren't quite there, and all 50 tax incentive programs do not fall under our authority. 2 fall under our authority. So I'd like to clear that up. But I believe that the comprehensive comprehensive evaluation of economic development is designed to collect that data. So I think the means to collect it exists as part of the role of completing that evaluation. We are to collect the data from the businesses and whatever other sources we can get the data from. We do have a relationship with Maine Revenue Services. We get what we can, keeping confidentiality issues in mind. We go to the Department of Labor. And when I say we, it's the independent third-party evaluator. We facilitate those conversations. Sometimes we act as the person or the department who's asking for the data and pass it on to that third-party evaluator. But again, when we don't have control of the relationships across all of these programs, we aren't going to be quite as successful as reaching the 79% response rate we did receive on program review. I've also, on pages 19 and 20, you don't have to turn to them yet, but on pages 19 and 20, you'll see 2 pages pulled from Public Law, Chapter 337 from the 124th Legislature. At that time, there was language removed from statute. If you look at E and F, which is on pages 19 and 20, I feel like if you looked at that language, you can see what authority we did have at one point in time that no longer exists. And maybe that'll help with the situation. I don't feel that DECD should ever be put in the position as a regulatory agency would be to compel that kind of data collection. As you read these 2 paragraphs, which I'll leave it to you to read, you'll see that we turned over a list of companies who were not complying after giving them plenty of chance to comply to Maine Revenue Services, and then they took over that function. And that's more appropriate. D on page 21. It refers back to finding 1. And it asks about our perspective on combining the economic development and the R&D evaluations with the efforts of OPEGA under Public Law 2015, Chapter 344. I feel it's too soon to consider that. I think there's some value for all of us as we move towards this one period where I'm not sure what's first on your list, but I'm hoping it's one that's already on our list this time, because I would love to see the comparison of how, let's say it's a Pine Tree Zone program. What's the comparison of how the hour value here, what the results are compared to what OPEGA comes up with? I think there's some value in that myself. So I think it's premature to discuss combining those. I do agree we can't leave duplicative efforts on the books. It's a waste of resources. E. I'm guessing this is a big one for everybody. The economic development strategy for the state. And it simply asks questions about how it's established and what is it. When I first took this position, that was a daunting task. But I can tell you that the first thing I did was go back to all of the past economic development strategies and read through all of them. And it's surprising the similarities between all of them. And of course, I think we all know where this administration's focus has been since Governor LePage was elected. And I think it goes to a theory of if we want these strategies that have been in place, if you consider the similarities and you say, all right, there have been some commonalities for a couple decades now, why haven't we reached with success? Why is PCI, per capita income, in 2005 ranked 30th, and in 2015 it's ranked 30th? And why in 2005 do we have 611,000 jobs? And then in 2015, where it's just under 605,000 jobs. We have other fundamental issues, and I think that's where this administration, and my direction is to focus on what this administration is focused on. That's fixing the foundation. That's a much bigger policy question than I think we need to be having here today, but that's where our focus has been. I've also given you the strategy document we created a few years ago. That would be the document that describes how we are continuing on with the economic development, I'll say strategy, but our strategy is to fix that foundation first while we continue along the path of trying to keep what we have for programs in place as successful as we can. I also believe that in many ways the legislature was insightful with the creation of the strategy in mind when the legislature placed the DECD commissioner, whoever it may be, it's actually 26 boards and commissions that a commissioner of DECD sits on. And it's through participation on these boards and commissions, as well as all the activities and duties that are required of the department, that puts us in constant contact with many organizations, whether it be private sector, nonprofits, other governments, throughout the states, regions, and it gives us the unique perspective on the economic development opportunities and barriers in the state. And it's through these conversations and activities that bring us to the conclusion that we have a foundation we need to fix first. And that's where we're focused on. Anybody want to tackle that one, or shall I move on?
That's a larger discussion for perhaps another day.
Thank you. And then that kind of threw me for a loop. I don't like to hear these things, but I mean, I spent quite a few years in a business where customer complaints I looked at as our biggest opportunity for creating long-term valuable customers. So when I hear something like this, some legislatures have heard concerns from local businesses that it is difficult and confusing to get assistance from DPCD. What are we doing? I say, I've got my office number down for you. I don't recall which legislator it was who mentioned this, but I would hope anyone who becomes aware of a problem or a challenge calls the department and we will jump on it. We certainly, that's what we're there for. Now, the first set of questions, and then I'll be done. I guess I want to state that I don't have specific answers for them, especially in light of the January 28, 2008 document I found. And I guess I don't understand why there's an expectation that DECD be the one to take action on recommendations that were made to the legislature in that report. I see our job as making sure we follow what statutorily we're required to do, and we do that to the best of our abilities within the shrinking resources we've had over time. But most of these questions appear to be, what are you doing about the recommendations we made to the legislature? So I got to tell you, the 2006 report has not been our playbook at all. I've referred to it, I've read it, I find interest in it, and I learn from it, but it's not our playbook. So it's kind of in a blanket form. That's the answer to that first group of questions.
Excuse me just a second, Commissioner Beth, could you direct us to where in our materials this first group of questions is? Make sure we're on the same page.
It would be the first document behind tab number 6.
How's that?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, thank you. I know there will be a number of questions. I'd like to start off with
Sure.
First of all, again, we're very glad you're here and appreciate the time you're spending with us. And I think that part of what I've learned today is to come to appreciate the fact that you are a creature of statute. Your duties are set out therein. You're supposed to do what you're tasked with, and you're not supposed to do things you're not tasked with. And I also appreciate the decrease in staffing you've been living under. That's pretty stark. But I think from what I'm hearing you say, and I think that almost all of us would agree, that whether it's called a tax expenditure or an economic development program or a research and development expenditure, that they're really all the same thing. It's either tax dollars that we've collected from people that we are spending in pursuit of an economic development goal, or we're foregoing money we would otherwise collect from taxpayers by virtue of exemptions that we create or deductions that we create or other tax avoidance mechanisms that we think are a good idea. And it struck me the first time I learned that we actually spend more money, quote unquote, on foregone revenue. That is, on deductions and exemptions, we spend more money that way than we actually take in as a state. So it is critical, and I know we all agree, that we make sure we're spending that money wisely, whether it's a Pine Tree Zone program or it's a direct grant under some research and development program or whatever. And I also think that the we as a legislature are finally getting the fact that we've never really been very good at evaluating the effectiveness of those expenditures to see if they're working. In fact, sometimes it's even hard to figure out why they were put in place in the first place, what the goals are, let alone whether we're reaching the goals. And we have now, with the tax expenditure legislation we've passed, we're finally going to begin to take a look in a systematic way, to take a look at each one of those larger programs and say, here's the goal we set for ourselves. Are we reaching that goal? Is this a program we ought to keep? Is it a program we ought to throw out? Is it something we should increase or decrease, or what should we do with it? And by accident, some of that's been put in our tax expenditure pile, but some of it's assigned to your department by statute. But it's all the same thing to me, I think to a lot of people. What's the difference whether it's Pine Tree Zone that happens to be assigned to DECD to administer, or some tax exemption that we've granted that now the tax expenditure effort is going to take a look at? It's all the same thing. And why doesn't it make sense that whatever mechanism we use, that it apply to all of these programs? In particular, we're tasking OPEGA with periodic review of the tax expenditure programs. Why shouldn't OPEGA be doing the Pine Tree Zone? Why shouldn't OPEGA be doing the R&D? Why shouldn't OPEGA be doing the other tasks which have been assigned to you? Because the Department of Economic and Community Development doesn't have the staff to do it. You outsource it to make sure it's independent, but also because you don't have the firepower, the people there to do it. And because of the fact that the statute doesn't have a whole lot of teeth in it, when you get a 30% response rate to your surveys, or even a 79% response rate to the programs which you directly administer, that's really unacceptable. I'm sure you would agree with that. If we're going to be giving away public money, we've got to expect businesses to be able to share with us the information we need in order to evaluate whether they're working or not. And frankly, if they don't want to give us the information, then they shouldn't be getting the tax breaks or the grants. And the thing I like about the OPEGA model is that we're working through the Maine Revenue Services, which in terms of security of information and confidentiality is really the gold standard. I'm not saying everybody trusts Maine Revenue Services, but they sure trust them a lot more than they do the legislature or any branch of the executive branch. So it's a long-winded question, and I apologize for the length of it, but you said in your remarks that you thought it was premature to talk about folding review of the departments now, folding review of programs now under your control into the overall tax expenditure process we are now engaged in. And I'm puzzled by that answer. Why is it premature?
I think we have some of the most valuable information we've ever had in the Comprehensive Economic Development Evaluation Report. And when you also look at the report for June that talks about where Maine stands from a competitive standpoint against other states, it becomes even more credible and more important to continue this. It's a 6-year contract we have with this independent third-party source. And that's important too. I think it ought to be outside of state government. I mean, whether it's OPEGA or DECD, I don't feel like it should be within state government that we do these. I think it should be an independent third party. We don't have an expert on staff, but that also means we don't have an expert on staff that's steering outcome of a third party independent. It truly is third party independent information. I encourage you to read the entire report. I know it's a lot. And I would certainly look at the June report that is on our website, because there's value in it. And until you've read both of those reports, I would not make a judgment to combine them. I really wouldn't. That's my opinion. My caution, I guess. In that June report, there's a section of that report that talks about how site selection works. And that could be a company that's already here in Maine, who's looking at expanding, and they're reviewing sites all across the country, or it could be a company who doesn't exist here and they're looking for a site. On either case, there's a process that occurs where by the time you get the phone call to ask what your programs are, they've already sifted and sorted all the other states out. We rank, there's a study on how Maine ranks there from a competitive standpoint. There are 25 MSAs taken that are comparable. I'm not even talking about the ones we don't have a chance of competing with. We're talking about comparable MSAs across the country. To Portland, Bangor, and the Lewiston Auburn area. And part of the reason why I don't like that being up on the website is because I don't want to broadcast that, but it's not a good picture.
The question,
And that means that we're simulating an environment that we should be attempting to create permanently by having all these tax incentive programs. We should tackle the foundation, and that again is the bigger policy question, which we're not here to discuss. But these reports reveal that, and I think it would be a mistake to discount them and ignore them.
Done.
I might just follow up. We had a conversation back along about the recommendations that were coming out of these reports, and the fact that there really hadn't, I wasn't observing that there was any action being taken on the part of the department or on the part of the legislature to make sure that the recommendations the evaluators were making were getting considered and acted on as necessary. So I guess my question is, because that's part of the value of the independent evaluation, is to take what is the result of it and make sure that something's done with it. So I would be interested in your perspective on whose responsibility is it to take what's in those reports and then shepherd them through whatever process needs to happen to get those recommendations understood and addressed either at the executive level or at the legislative level if that's appropriate. Is that the legislature's responsibility in your view, or TDCB's by virtue of commissioning report? Because I think that's part of what has gone wrong here, is there hasn't been a follow-through on and when opportunity to get the questions that the report raised answered and all of that with the evaluator or with you folks. So I see that as kind of a critical piece, and I didn't know if you had a perspective on that, because maybe that could be clarified somehow and thereby push the value of that process forward a little bit.
Good observation.
But Commissioner, let me just put it one in a different way if I could, and then I'm sure others have questions. Sometimes I like to look at things, I know others do as well, pretending we don't have anything in place. There's nothing here. We're spending all this money, but we have no way to evaluate anything. We're going to create a system so we can figure out if we're spending our money wisely or not. A blank slate. We would never set it up the way it is now, would we? We're over here, OPEGA is analyzing certain programs under one statute, and over here, DEC is evaluating other programs in a different way, with outside vendors, with a different focus. I think we would all agree, would never do that. So let's start from a clean slate. And why doesn't it make sense to do all of these in the same comprehensive, periodic, and systematic way?
Why does it make sense
To
to do them comprehensively?
in a single process, as opposed to you all doing it under one statute where you're getting 30% or 79% response rate, and OPEGA's doing all these other tax expenditures over here through Maine Revenue Services. Why do we want to keep two systems? That's just that we can't afford it. And we're getting programs evaluated under different criteria by you and different criteria by OPEGA. It just, why should people be happy with that system?
We crafted the RFP. We involved that. Deputy Commissioner Garland reached out to Beth Ashcroft and said, we want your input, because we know these discussions go on. And we understand what OPEGA's role is and what's asked of OPEGA often. So we wanted to align how we administer that program. So I think the effort was there to do that. And Beth had a lot of input into the RFP and what we finally ended up with for a product. But I think but the users of these programs use them collectively. For each project or each opportunity the state has to attract either an expansion or a company to stay here or to attract them from the outside, they're looking at all of the programs and they're deciding Once I take all of the programs that may apply to my situation, and I consider the cost of doing business here in the state of Maine, and I add that all up together, how do I compare to this location or that location? So to do them one at a time, we could be shooting ourselves in the foot slowly over time. If we're eliminating programs without taking into consideration how they're impacting others.
But you don't take into account how they impact others when you do your review of, say, the Pine Tree Zone. You're not taking a look at some tax exemption that the legislature has granted, which may be a part of a piece of whether a business locates here or not. Aren't you doing the same thing? That is, analyzing a particular program through an independent vendor in that same kind of vacuum?
Not really. We're looking at a host of programs. And that June report gets into quite a bit of detail on how they all work together.
Questions?
I have a comment.
Senator Vogt.
Thank you. I think sort of what Beth was getting at and what Commissioner Trevay was both getting at. And the issue is, are we even at a place where we can make use of these programs or make use of these evaluations? You know, we're spending money on a third-party evaluation. We're using government resources for OPEGA to evaluate. And then are we actually changing anything based upon what those findings are? And, you know, are we in a position where we've cut this budget for economic development so much that it really doesn't matter what these reports say, because we don't have the resources to implement any of the recommendations. And I find that to be extremely frustrating, and I don't think that it's isolated to economic development. I think that it's an issue across our entire state government. We're awash in reports that go ignored, and there are way too many of them, and way too few resources to implement the recommendations. So I think that's sort of just a statement I wanted to make. And in a way, the reports are almost irrelevant because we've just budgeted ourselves out of being able to use them.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would suggest, however, that if lack of staffing to do the work necessary for satisfying these recommendations is a problem, then I would expect that there would be new proposed positions in a budget proposal, which in part are justified by the need to fulfill the recommendations that were made in this reporting, this analysis that is meant to produce accountability. And I think that we should, at first, you're talking about establishing a foundation, and unfortunately there isn't enough detail for me to understand what that foundation is, but I think that there's a certain foundation in how government operates as well, in meeting the public expectation for responsibility and transparency, and that includes knowing whether they're doing the jobs that they're set to do. And I don't think that we have a good handle yet on whether that's the case. But what we have for participation in providing the data necessary to analyze these is a problem. And I don't know if you can answer what the response rates are heading into next February's report. But we need to fix that problem. It's part of our public trust. So we need to hear from you what it is you need for staffing, or if you need statutory changes as well. I think we need to hear that so that we can help you with that. But I also don't think that simply because this is information reported to the legislature, that means all of it is something that's not in your hands and it needs legislative action. If it's proposing legislative changes, yes. But other changes are ones that need your leadership in your department as to, well, how would you meet this? What need you propose to the legislature for budget or statutory changes to achieve the aims of that recommendation, and that's still something that we should be hearing from you in LCRED, not in appropriations or elsewhere. I think that we should be looking at how to achieve that accountability and how to achieve that transparency. And I am wondering if you don't feel that that's something that the department should be doing, or if you feel it should. It was unclear in how you described the change in statute that removed the authority for you to compel people to provide the data. Whether you were suggesting that you shouldn't have that authority, or if you were simply commenting on the role of MRS in that process. I'd like you to clarify what you think the right solution is if we go back and fix the problem created by the removal of that language.
Well, I have to admit I'm a little confused because I heard you talking about Wolpega's recommendations in the 2006 report and how we respond to those. But I also think you want me to address the language that was removed to statute that gave us, and in combination with Maine Revenue Services, the authority to compel businesses to comply with the request for data.
Yes, and the first one, I was noting that although you had suggested that all of those were recommendations that are to the legislature, I feel that these are not all things that the legislature is the right place to begin acting upon them. And I guess I'd like to hear which ones you feel, if they're going to be done, you should be making proposals to how do we achieve this. Because I don't think that the legislature should be looking at your department and saying, well, I guess we need to create another, 1 or 2 positions because we need this objective met. I think that's your job, to say what staff you need or other functions in order to fulfill that expectation. So that's clarifying the first part. And the second, absolutely right. I would like to know what you feel the right solution is on compelling responsiveness. I agree with Senator Cates' observation that they're unwilling to participate in that way, that we shouldn't be granting them that benefit.
Regarding the 2006 report, I think the larger point I was trying to make is that it hasn't been focused. Those recommendations have not been, I used the term our playbook. Especially when I found the 2008 response that indicated that all of the action that was agreed upon was met. If there has been action not met since then, I guess that's what we need to have a further discussion on. But what got moved into statute, we currently do meet within resources. We could probably have a discussion around section 130700, the criteria that should be applied to all economic development proposals. That we would need additional staff people to handle. There's no way we can keep up with all the different economic development proposals that come through 2,000 bills in the legislature. Do an analysis and turn around reports back to the legislature all within the same session is impossible for us to do. Yet we are statutorily required to do it. There's an obvious hole there. I'll jump to the other section now on compelling cooperation on getting responses. All I was doing was pointing out what was there, and I think that system worked at the time. I don't recall the circumstances that were going on. I wasn't really in this role, so I don't know why that got pulled from statute and why the reporting requirements of businesses got changed. But I think some kind of similar circumstance, if you were to put that in place, would work well, where we have a process where we ask for the data, we give notice, we really need this data, or there's going to be a consequence, and now you have 30 days, we don't get the data, then you'll be turned over to Maine Revenue Services. But action, any action taken from that point on, we feel ought to be done by Maine Revenue Services, not Department of Economic and Community Development. because it conflicts with our role. And our role is to help businesses. We can't be pounding them over the head on other issues at the same time. But I agree, we need the data, and we should be higher than 30%, and the tools to get that data from the businesses who are getting the benefit, we appreciate it.
Thank you. Chairman Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming today, Commissioner. This, I assume, this Making Maine Competitive document is your playbook. Am I right?
Yeah.
4 years on, how do you feel you're doing on it?
Well, it's a two-step process. We are stuck on step one still. And step one is all fixing the foundation theory I talked briefly about, which is a large discussion.
If I may.
Yes.
Do you think and I know you weren't here at the very beginning, but one of the earliest things that this administration did was to blow up the planning office, and then not long after created the Office of Planning and Management. Is that what it's called? Policy and Management. Did that make your job going forward more difficult? That whole process of killing an agency and moving stuff around to different agencies, was that? I mean, I don't expect that you're going to say it was a positive for DECD, but was it a big negative?
It wasn't. It wasn't a big negative. I would like to have had the economists land at the Department of Economic Development, to be honest with you, but no, it wasn't a negative. In fact, as we've been having this discussion, I've been thinking of ways we might lean on that agency to help with some of this work that we're discussing that's left undone.
Alluded to, whether directly actually, and other community members have made references to the lack of staff you have to meet some of these responsibilities. In fact, you pointed out that since 2004 you've had like a 25% reduction in staff. My question is, since we understand that for you to do your job, like any other agency or commissioner, you need to have a basic minimum number of staff to do that. My question is, in your budgets, have you requested additional staff? And if so, was that rejected in the overall administrative budget? Where has the failure come in terms of getting your staff to the level you think should be?
Having to live within a certain number and facing the challenge of, all right, if I want to increase staff, I have to cut program funds, and that's not an option, because the next step with any monetary cuts are program cuts at this point. And I think we're down to the bare bones on program. The program that we're running right now is not successful. So I will, we have great staff at DEC, they work hard, they get an awful lot done. But I think it's important that the programs we have remain in place.
But whose rule is that? Because other agencies have, in fact, increased their budgets. Some have, some haven't. So why is, if that's a rule, whose is it? And two, why is it applicable to your agency and not everybody else's, since we ended up with a $6.7 billion budget?
It's a matter of priorities. I don't know if I can answer your question in the detail you'd probably like to have. But we did start out with a certain budget number. And I received an ask to find a way to cut more from it, and it wasn't going to be people. So that's when we came up with a way where some money is being returned by the Maine Technology Institute. If that's permanent, we've done damage to the Maine Technology Institute. I don't intend that to be permanent. That's a success story there as well. I guess I say where else in government can we make cuts so that our budget can be reestablished? That's the question. I can't, if I'm given a number that I have to live within, then that's what I have to do.
I understand, and I think that there are certainly legislators who would like to assist in providing more staff that you think you see as critically important to doing these various assembly responsibilities, but we have to find a way to do that you're not limited in making the request. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Other questions or comments from the Commissioner? Representative Scrocchio?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gervais, I'm just going to look, I'm looking at the report that was presented, which I thought was not the final report. So the most urgent recommendations provided through the analysis, and there were a few, and I'll just, develop central storage for incentive report documentation. Okay, to evaluate the incentive programs going forward, it is necessary for the evaluating party to obtain as many recipient lists and as many annual reports from as many incentive programs as possible. Legislative changes should be made to allow the analyst team designated by the state of Maine to have full access to program data as needed. I don't remember seeing any legislation around that. I could be wrong, and because there were a lot of bills. Incentive contingency clauses in reporting. Many states offer this contingent upon the company meeting a predefined goal and reporting annually, so progress towards or achievement of the goal can be evaluated or reported. Checks and balances should be worked into the legislative mandate behind each of the incentive programs to allow the programs to perform more successfully and to have reporting to understand their own success. Incentive confidentiality. It talked about legislative changes needed to be made for full access to and evaluation of program data as needed, whether this is performed by a state agency or by a contracted third party under a confidentiality agreement. And it talks about that fewer questions, smaller surveys can be given if we do that. I don't know that we've done that except through the tax expenditure program, which was not intended to address this evaluation. And the central website and our guiding organization. Those were the most immediate problems. And then it went on for a lot of other ones that talked about, incentives not being the prime driver of company decisions to locate and invest in a given location. Depending upon the industry and type of business activities, companies explore multiple location drivers. It's the icing on the cake. So, I just want to know, in those recommendations that were specifically to you, not to OPEGA, not to the legislature, just to DECD, in the way that I look at it, was presented to us, but these are things that needed to happen. I agree that you probably don't have enough staff to do that, but what attempts and where are you in those recommendations? And how can we help?
Well, to be honest with you, I thought that through the efforts, we've had a lot of discussion around the confidentiality issues with Maine Revenue Services. I know Brett has as well. And we did not put forth any legislation on any of those three at this point. But I certainly expected that the confidentiality issue would be discussed, and noticed it was being discussed. But I don't know if we're going to completely solve that. The issues are bigger than I think any of us realize within Maine Revenue Services to be able to share that data. And it's not just confidentiality, it's how the data is received and whether or not they can break out the detail part of the problem as well. The more accurate way, I think, is being able to get the data directly from the businesses. So that's the piece we need to work on.
Thank you. Yes, Rose.
So you're not saying, in my mind, if I was home listening to this, I'd be going, but wait a minute, we're giving them this really wonderful benefit. It behooves them, it's incumbent upon them to provide that information if they want to continue to receive the benefit. That, for me, is the basic bottom line. So how can we, I think that that's what we're here trying to figure out. We don't want report after report that tells us we need to do that, and because then you're ending up making decisions on these gut feelings at budget time when somebody says, well, I don't really like that program, and they convince, everybody else who doesn't really understand all the basics. We have nothing to look at because we don't have any data. If you look at the response rate when they're making an evaluation and you get 1 to 4 responses, or more than or less than 15 or more than 15. I looked at that stuff, and that is concerning to me. So I guess we're just asking for your input and your help, and if what we need is a different way to do it and we need more staff. I think this is too much money to just say, oh, let's wash our hands, just too much work, too much, just no way to do it. Because I just don't think it's a good way to going forward in a legislature where we have term limits, lots of change every 2 years. In my mind, the instability of government is the biggest impediment that we have to economic development.
I think that's what I did on pages 19 and 20 is what I gave, and that was my suggestion to get at that issue.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions? beyond any promise that we would. And Commissioner Joyce, thank you very much for being here. I think you've all learned a great deal. But before you go,
Thank you. In order for me to understand accountability and reporting, and I think I'd like to ask a more general question. It sounds like there's an awful lot going on in the office that you can't do because of positions and budget and so on. But, you know, we hear from the governor how much he's out seeking businesses to come to Maine. I guess how do you address and support the Maine economic development process? I represent Bucksport and Arlington. Bucksport's just lost the mill, and we're about to lose the subsidy for PERC. But, you know, those are problematic, but I also see them as a real opportunity. We've got probably the most important assets the state could have: deep water ports, river, rail, highway, directly connected to the grid. So we're right in the middle of what I think could be a real economic opportunity. So do you respond to business requests, or do you identify assets and support? How could the state of Maine more benefit from the department than diminish the assets that you have to accomplish what you want to do, and require that you have reports? What are we not doing? What policy and programs? So we need economic development. So how do you address something like the assets of Arlington and Bucksport?
Well, thank you. We're very well aware of that situation. In fact, when it first became known, which was with very little warning to, I think, all of us, we immediately went to work. We had a couple buyers lined up for that. We had an unwilling seller. So we have to let that play out and make sure we get that property back into shape from an environmental standpoint. And we have people looking at that property now. We don't discuss those projects publicly because we've lost too many projects when they find their way into the press prematurely. So I'm very silent. Our whole staff is very silent about it. And it's not in an effort to not be transparent. It's in an effort to reach success on these projects. So yeah, we're very well. I mean, we're going to be looking at a situation in Jay, I understand, from this morning. We've got some job loss coming there. That was just announced. Same company. So I go back to the foundation. We need to look at that overall larger policy issue. And we need to be within the first sifting and sorting exercise of these companies. We can't be at the bottom of the list when they have 8 companies, as Verso does across the country. And they're looking at, all right, who's got our biggest cost? Where's our biggest problem child? And then, boom, cut it. We've got to get off the bottom, because we never get asked, what are your incentives, because you made it to the top part of the list. So to me, the best thing you can do is focus on those policy changes and fix the foundation. That helps economic development in Maine. We're working with what we got as best we can. And this goes beyond our department resources, I realize. But we're focused on those properties throughout the state. And we do actively try to get projects in.
Thank you. Senator Davis.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, and I agree that we do definitely need to get off the bottom in many, many different ways, tax-wise and energy-wise, about every wise that we can come up with, and perhaps gain a little wisdom along the way. I'm curious, I know that, I'm quite sure that you know that one of my passions has been hunting and fishing and the promotion thereof, and perhaps I will be more honest and say the lack, as I see it, thereof. And I read this page here on tourism that you have here, and I struggled to see where any of the things that are near and dear to my heart, such as those two things, snowmobiling and skiing, all the things that I believe, at least my area and many areas in this state has to offer. And I'm curious, how much input does your department have in the publications from Tourism Bureau and those people? And are you considering reviewing them at some point in time? And perhaps I will not put any more legislation in to turn the consternation of some of your people and some of the folks over there at the Bureau.
I enjoy those debates.
I understand that they've been numerous on Sunday River and other places.
Yeah.
Those debates have taken place.
Right. No, I think we took a big step forward. God, it's another report, I know, but we learned something from that report. That report was research. And I'm talking about the hunting and fishing report, which is completed by the Office of Tourism in conjunction with IFW, which is completed. And it was instructive, and it points to where we need to focus in order to gain additional business. And
Well, it's near, excuse me, I'm sorry.
that's okay, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the three, snowmobile and hunting and fishing is over $1 billion a year. And it could be, in my estimation, $5 billion. And if it was marketed right.
And in recent years, there's been new competition in marketing for those areas, because marketing for that has not been something that goes decades back. It's pretty fresh that people are starting to compete. I think everybody's waking up to the fact that they're competing against other marketing efforts now, not just hoping that because we have it, it will come. But I don't know if you look at that report, but there's some exceptions within it that we plan on taking action on. My caution is, to your point, is that separating the efforts by taking money away from one and putting it elsewhere doesn't accomplish the goal. I think combining the efforts and leveraging each other's efforts and dollars is the way we can get there. And I know Carol Ann and myself have been working pretty hard at making sure that we do have that in mind. All of our tourism.
I hear what you're saying, and there's no real love of lobsters in Maine. But there's an awful lot more to Maine than lobsters and lighthouses.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Despite the thriving lobster industry in the state of this county. That's very true. Commissioner, thank you. We're going to ask this to be the last question from the Commissioner, because I know he's going to get going. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, I don't see, and perhaps this is a suggestion for better understanding on our part of what the strategies here, the programs that get priority and emphasis. What I don't see anything in here about is an economic analysis. Because in the end, what we're interested in is how this benefits the well-being of Maine people, work opportunities and income in communities that work well. And what I don't see is just what the sensitivity and the mobility and the growth opportunity and other things around different sectors of our economy. And it talks in here about our strengths, but doesn't assess at all what are the important factors in those sectors are holding them back. And therefore, what are the places that we have leverage in creating a stronger economy? So, and I particularly am concerned that that sort of analysis be part of this, because we haven't achieved the results that we need yet. And the question is, well, what is there that needs to change? What in our strategy is not sufficient to overcome whatever influences that have led us to not seeing greater success? And I think that that comes from, if you're looking at economy, involving economists in understanding the nuances of what the playing field is in Maine, not just how we compete with others, because we can't just take Maine and move it down to just offshore Boston and join the Boston greater business community. And I understand and I see that there's an interest in building on Maine's strengths. What I don't see is that understanding of the economic underpinnings of what makes those sectors of our economy work. And I'd really like to see us pulling those levers that economists agree make a difference, and people in those sectors understand are their challenges to grow.
Part of what you're getting at is within that June report. I'd offer to make it available to everybody, but imagine if I produced the report physically, you're not going to get it right off. So, but if you go to our website, it is posted on our website. Again, look for the June report. Some of that is in there.
Great, I will look for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner, again, thanks for being here, and you can blame your late arrival at your next meeting on us.
No problem.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Members are here as well. This idea of what's the best way to evaluate these programs and what are we really striving to get out of evaluation and do with the evaluation. I do have still the history of how it came to be that we had DECD doing this comprehensive economic development evaluation and what the goal was of the department when they laid out the proposal for that. And I think part of what's being discussed about the difference between the tax expenditure reviews and what was originally intended for DECD independent evaluation, if you won't mind me getting a little geeky about evaluation, is the difference between a micro level evaluation of a individual program and a macro level evaluation of how the entire group of programs is contributing to some larger goal. So it started out in DECD, that evaluation was intended to do the latter, to be the macro level evaluation. How's the state doing in comparison to the states? How's the state doing in comparison to its economic development strategy, et cetera? Those first reports came out and there wasn't enough data for the evaluator to be able to say that. The legislature was frustrated because it didn't speak to any individual program. So in this latest round, they did try to combine both objectives. Let's look at individual programs to the degree we can and do the macro level evaluation. It's very difficult to do both in one evaluation. So I think there can be coordination versus duplication and overlap between whatever OPEGA might be tasked to do ultimately and what the department is seeking to do. Both types of evaluation are valuable. And I think that's what you heard the commissioner expressing, is that there are some pieces that come out of that macro level evaluation that we wouldn't want to lose, and which OPEGA is not preparing to do as part of its tax expenditure review process. So I'll just lay that as a groundwork. I'd be happy to discuss those nuances. We'll to the LCRIB committee, and I'll certainly be discussing it with you as we figure out how to go forward. That's
Thank
some
you.
of the background.
Thank you. Senator Johnson and Representative Stracchio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It strikes me that we should perhaps be considering, or more properly perhaps with our recommendation support, LCRIB should be submitting some legislation to re-implement the authority to compel responses. And I didn't hear anything from the commissioner that suggested that was the wrong direction to act, inquiring about that. But some discussion and work on exactly the nuances of the right approach, rather than simply re-implementing what was proposed before. Are there ways to improve it or not? And worthwhile, I think that's something we should definitely take on, ensuring happens.
Thank you, Representative Stracchio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it just seems to me, though, listening to this, it's like you get a report, follow through. How do we legislate follow through, follow up? The report comes and you say to the person, and you know you're leaving the end of April or middle of April, hopefully, and you say, oh, so what are you going to do? And at what point? And then a new legislature comes in, and how, I guess that's the whole point behind that evaluation process that carries on regardless of who's sitting in the House and the Senate.
And that was a piece that we were trying to tackle specifically with the proposal on the tax expenditures. It's the idea, if we're going to bother to evaluate it, how do we make sure that it gets into the pipeline for consideration afterwards? And we think we've achieved that, but I would agree with Commissioner Gervais, we haven't done any of those evaluations yet. We don't know what kind of success we even are going to have until we do some first rounds of that. So as much as I'm hopeful that it's really going to produce exactly what you all are looking for, you know, we haven't tested that out yet. And we may well hit some bumps in the road that we didn't think to anticipate either. So, but I think it's a valuable process to continue with.
Thank you. Let me ask one other question if I can. This has to do with, I appreciate now that what the department does is not just an evaluation of an individual program, but how it fits together with other things that they're doing and how important that part of it is. But let's take pine tree zones as an example. I mean, are pine tree zones so different than other tax expenditures that PAGR is going to be taking a look at in this new process, that there's a reason to have that program evaluated in some other way by some other people in some other department?
Actually, right now, they'll be evaluated under both, because it is a tax expenditure and it is on OPEGA's list to review. What ought to happen is, depending on the timing of our review, that whatever we gather for information or results can feed the independent evaluators' more macro level piece that includes pine tree zones as well. So I think ultimately we'll have to talk about where is the better place to be trying to evaluate individual programs on an individual level, and where's the best place to be trying to do a macro level evaluation if that's what the legislature still thinks is valuable. I think you heard the commissioner say he thought that was.
Well, are there other programs which the department is now evaluating because of the accident of the statute that are qualitatively different from the kind of systematic tax expenditure evaluation that we are about to embark on?
Well, some of the economic development programs are tax expenditures, so they're over here in this
Right.
bucket. There's a lot of tax expenditures you've tasked us with that have nothing to do with economic
Right.
development. So part of the conversation for me is, are we all only really interested in those tax expenditures or economic development programs that are supposed to be incentives for something? Because if we are, we got an awful lot over here in this tax expenditure bucket that doesn't fall into that general purpose, and we're going to be evaluating those regardless, because that's the way we've let them out. And then over here on this side, we haven't laid it out well enough for the legislature to be able to say, oh yeah, we know we're meeting this goal, or we see this being successful, or here's how we would tweak it if we wanted to do it differently. So it's still a lot to discuss, I think.
Thank you. Anything else on this topic? Representative Sanderson.
Thank you. Didn't the commissioner indicate there were really only a couple that were a large proportion that there would be an overlap on, or how many would that be?
If you look at behind the yellow sheet under tab 6, I think I had done that. If you look on page 2, way down at the bottom, legislative review tax expenditure programs. By my count of the programs that were included in the last DECD evaluation, there were 20 of them that were tax expenditures that are captured under the tax expenditure review process, and there were 59 total. So there were 39 other economic development programs that would not be part of the tax expenditure review process.
But not all of those will be done at the same time, correct? Are those
Right.
spaced out?
Yes.
So perhaps we could keep in mind that even though there is the duplication, if it turns out that the OPEGA review is becoming more of just a mirror of what a third-party independent review is, then maybe we could revisit those pieces. However, on the initial launch of this review from our point of view, it'll give us an opportunity to see if there are differences and where those differences are.
The other thing that is the big problem and has been with tax expenditures, and it was also with a number of other economic development programs when we reviewed those, is this idea that it's hard to evaluate something if you don't know what it was shooting for in the first place. And so that is another challenge that DECD's independent evaluators are up against when they go to try to weave in an evaluation of an individual program. Sometimes there's not a lot there to say, well, what were supposed to be the goals and benchmarks. Again, we hope with the tax expenditure piece we've now created a loop with the legislature that eventually will get clarity around those things and have something to use as a standard going forward. But the independent, DECD and the independent evaluator may not have the benefit of that same loop if nobody's shepherding consideration of the recommendations that are coming out of those evaluations. So,
Thank you. Okay, I think we are done with this topic, and thank you very much. And members of the Elk Creek Committee who are here, you're certainly welcome to stay for the other festivities we're going to be engaged in. You don't have to. There might be balloons. Thanks very much. And next we're going to move on to here's a summary of the July 17, 2015 GOC meeting, which is at tab 1. Any changes or corrections or additions to that? Seeing none, we'll accept that. Next on to new business, and thank those people who are here from OIT for their patience. Today is the presentation of the final report on Office of Information Technology.
all right, thank you. You might recall, I'll just set the stage for this, and I'm going to ask a senior analyst, Wendy Cherubini, who's been spearheading this review now for 2 years, to present the report for you. We also have with us Peter Schablick from Resnick, which is the consultant we hired to help us assist us with the final phase of this review. But just as a refresher, this was a 2-year follow-up review of certain areas that fall within the responsibility of the Office of Information Technology. And so this has been a long time in review, and we're happy to be able to present it to you today. So I'm going to ask Wendy to join me, if she would. And before we get started, I do just want to extend our thanks to management and staff at the Office of Information Technology, as well as staff, and for their cooperation throughout this whole 2-year period. And I also want to publicly take this opportunity to say thank you to Wendy. Wendy is going to be leaving us after 10 years. Sadly for us, and hopefully wonderfully for her, to have something new and exciting to turn to. But I do want to publicly thank Wendy for all her contributions. She was here when the original OPEGA office began, and we've been through a lot of interesting times together, and we're going to miss her. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is news to our committee, Wendy. It's kind of a sad day, but thanks for being here today.
You'll be up. I'm Wendy Cherubini, Senior Analyst with OPEGA, and with me is Peter Schablick, a partner with Resnick, the consultant that we retained with IT audit experience to help us with this follow-up review of the Office of Information Technology. As Beth mentioned, this is a formal follow-up review that we did at the request of the GOC following a number of years since the 2006 OPEGA report on Office of Information Technology, statewide information technology planning and management, which followed the consolidation of all IT services into one entity under DAS in 2005. Periodically, we have been reporting to you on OIT's implementation of those recommendations in that report. And then in 2011, there was a new request that came in to have OPEGA look at OIT. And there were also a number of similar issues to the request that were raised in unsolicited complaints. And as a result of that, in 2012, the GOC of the 125th Legislature asked us to do a formal follow-up, looking specifically at 3 critical areas that OIT is responsible for, which are project management, business continuity planning and disaster recovery, and supporting the data needs of executive branch departments. During this 2-year period, we monitored OIT's progress, developing and then implementing its own strategic improvement plan. OIT reported its progress to you and to OPEGA several times in March 2013 through 2014, and then we retained Resnick to conduct the final phase of this review by doing an independent assessment of OIT's progress And we also asked them to identify any significant challenges or barriers that might be impeding OIT's progress and make recommendations for addressing them. We concur with Cohn-Resnick's recommendations, and our recommendations follow theirs in this report. I just want to go through a little bit of the report. It's a big fat report, so just to tell you what's in it. The beginning part is our sort of summary and recommendations. We have 7 issues that we identified, and related to that are 7 recommendations. Following that, beginning on page 19, is the report, the final report from Cohn-Resnick, which includes their summary, as well as their detailed observations using a specific framework, a good COBIT framework for assessing information technology functions. That's followed by the strategic gap analysis using OIT's strategic plan and Cohn-Resnick's assessment of their progress on their plan. Also included, finally, as Appendix D in their report, is the financial warehouse gap analysis, which I'll speak about a little bit later, but this was done by the Office of Information Technology Center and Analytics Group. And then there's some background material for you to look at around the RFP response items and business intelligence and analytics issues. Finally, at the end, we put in an article from Governing Magazine around data analytics in other states, just to put Maine's position in perspective with regard to information technology, and the formal response letter from the Office of Information Technology. So going in, I have Peter here to answer technical questions, since I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in IT audits and the details of it. But I do want to, at a high level, talk a little bit about the 4 questions that we tried to get that we felt like we needed answers to for you around the Office of Information Technology progress. And the first one was, to what extent has OIT effectively implemented its 2013 Strategic Improvement Plan for the 3 areas we focused on in this review? And what Cohn-Resnick and we found during this time period is that OIT has made significant progress implementing those actions that it could take on its own, and we expect it to continue to improve in these areas. However, there are a number of actions in OIT's plan that were contingent upon the participation and partnerships with all state agencies that have not occurred. And that was really due to organizational challenges or barriers that OIT does not have the authority to address on its own. These include the lack of executive level IT governance to ensure adequate funding for statewide initiatives, as well as collaboration, cooperation, and action by all agencies on IT-related goals. Focusing in on the 3 specific areas, we looked at to what extent OIT has achieved improvements in project management, and again, we note that OIT has made significant progress in developing its capabilities and moving from what is known as the waterfall methodology for addressing running project management to agile project management methodology. We believe information improvement in other areas will better align OIT with industry standard practices, and some areas that we identified for improvement and Cohn-Resnick identified for improvement were things like their Agile Center of Excellence is not fully developed, standard processes for project initiation and closeout were not consistently followed, project managers are not involved in project intake and cannot access data necessary to develop project budgets or analyze budget to actual cost for each project that they're working on for partner agencies. We answered the question, to what extent has OIT achieved improvements in business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning? And we see that OIT has made significant progress addressing known gaps and helping agencies with planning on an ad hoc basis. In July 2014, a BCP DR manager was hired who was developing structures necessary to support statewide BCP DR planning. But to date, these efforts have not mitigated risks the state faces. Business impact analyses, which are necessary for business continuity and disaster recovery planning, have not been completed for any agency. Agency participation is critical for business continuity and disaster recovery planning, and it has been impacted by the organizational challenges outside of OIT's control. And And last, we looked at the extent to which OIT has achieved improvements in its capacity to support the data and analytic needs of analysts, managers, and decision makers in all state agencies. Little progress has been made in this area. It wasn't an area that was focused on until recently, and in 2014, OIT formed the Enterprise Warehouse and Analytics Group. This is another area that requires all agencies' commitment and participation, and an executive level forum for engaging all agencies is still sort of in the development phase. So we found that data analytics and governance capabilities are inconsistent across state government, and when CR, Resnick, assessed the overall maturity of the state, they found the agencies to be at what is known as an immature level, with limited users, siloed information systems across agencies, and no designated executive business sponsor. We identified, as I mentioned earlier, 7 issues, and I'll just go through them, starting on page 5 in the report, as they associate with each recommendation that we're making. First recommendation is that the administration should establish an executive-level, enterprise-wide IT governance function. Currently, there is no statewide executive-level directive or governance for BCPDR, IT project management, or data governance and analytics, even though these are areas that are important for each state agency and collectively critical to the state. OIT doesn't have the authority to direct agencies to fund or engage in these efforts, but several actions in their plan were contingent on agency funding and or participation. In 2014, the Office of Policy and Management was directed to facilitate efforts around data governance and analytics, but that role does not include business continuity planning or disaster recovery, IT project management. It also doesn't include enterprise-wide activities such as establishing an overall vision, strategy and goals, establishing and supporting enterprise or statewide priorities, ensuring adequate funding for enterprise-wide initiatives, clarifying roles and responsibilities for OIT and agencies, or ensuring collaboration, cooperation, and action by all parties. We recommend that the administration establish an executive-level enterprise-wide IT function with responsibility and authority to address these areas. This function could initially focus on the 3 areas of this review and expand to oversee and drive the development of service level agreements we outlined in our recommendation number 4. Our second recommendation involves business impact analyses, and that the administration should ensure BIAs and subsequent business continuity plans are completed for all agencies. Business continuity planning and disaster recovery efforts have not mitigated risks associated with potential disasters or catastrophic system failures. BIAs are a process that identifies critical business functions and describes what would be necessary to recover them in the event of a service disruption or disaster. They're necessary. Each agency has to complete a BIA in order to come up with a business continuity or disaster recovery plan. And the box on page 6 sort of refers to how that process works and some of the objectives that we found in another state's business impact analysis for objectives in Oregon, so that you have an idea of why agency participation is important, because OIT can't possibly know the things that each agency needs to have up and running. Like the Secretary of State, how long can they go if something goes down and they can't renew their registrations quickly, or voter registration or driver licenses. So these are things that the information has to be provided to OIT in order to develop a business continuity plan. As I mentioned earlier, in 2014, OIT hired a new BCPDR manager and adopted a more standard industry approach to BIAs. Currently, they plan to complete their BIA and use it as a model to roll out for other state agencies to follow. The current plan is to have BIAs for all agencies completed within the next 2 years, with BCPDR plans to follow. However, organizational barriers that we noted in recommendation 1 and in 5 present significant challenges to completing BIAs and subsequent BCPDR plans within acceptable timeframes. In the meantime, the state is at risk. We recommend that the administration, as part of addressing recommendations 1 and 5, establish a mechanism for ensuring business impact analyses, and some subsequent VCPs are completed by the end of 2017. This mechanism should include monitoring and oversight to ensure the work is prioritized, and OIT and all agencies are dedicating the resources necessary to meet this goal. Our third recommendation addresses the state's data governance and analytics capabilities. Currently, data governance and analytics capabilities and practices are inconsistent across the executive branch and overall at an immature level. I will just like to refer you to page 15 of Cohen-Resnick's report, which has a nice little diagram of a business intelligence maturity model. Page 15 of Appendix A. And what Cohen-Resnick found when they assessed the state was that we're at level 2, which is a tactical level of 5, with limited users, stovepiped or siloed systems, and inconsistent data. And that one example of this that is included in Cohen-Resnick's report is the state's existing financial reporting systems, which are inadequate to meet the needs of analysts, administrators, and decision makers. When OIT's Enterprise Warehousing and Analytics Group conducted a recent gap analysis of the financial warehouse for the State Controller's Office, the report found key data missing from various systems that create a need to use multiple systems to answer business questions, different agencies using different subsets of reporting systems, and the overall usability of the system needing improvement. I will note that according to the State Controller's Office, these gaps are in the process of being, remedied, recommendations. And that Maine is not alone. Continuous improvement in the area of data governance and analytics requires partnerships between OIT and state agencies with clearly defined roles and responsibilities of each party. Advancing data governance and analytics capabilities should be considered when addressing our recommendations 1, 4, and 5. And in addition, we recommend on page 8 that agencies should develop necessary internal business intelligence capacities to effectively manage and utilize their data. And we know that this might need to take the form of a dedicated position with responsibility and technical expertise to collaborate with OIT and drive data governance and analytics. OIT should develop a formal data governance policy with controls to manage data integrity and privacy risks for itself, and a model policy for agencies to use as a basis for their own. Agencies should develop data governance policies specific to their data with assistance from OIT as necessary. OIT and agencies should partner to develop an inventory of data sources in each agency and assess the criticality and quality of data in each source. And finally, OIT should identify and implement standard data query and analytics tools that will be used across agencies and develop capabilities to support agencies in using those tools by providing training and technical assistance. And related to this, around the roles and responsibilities of OIT and the agencies is our recommendation number 4, which is that OIT should establish service-level agreements with each state agency. The roles, responsibilities, and expectations of OIT and the agencies it serves are not clearly defined or communicated. Each focus area of this review requires a partnership between OIT and state agencies to be effectively and efficiently addressed. OIT has consistently stated that its role is as a service function with limited business area responsibilities and authorities. CR observed that this is an appropriate role for OIT, and we concur. OIT was clear about its role and the services it provides. However, both OPEGA and Cohen-Resnick observed that agencies do not fully understand OIT's role versus theirs and may not be aware of the responsibilities OIT expects and needs them to fulfill. Additionally, although OIT is a service function, it does not appear to have a fully developed customer service focus and culture. 10 years after IT consolidation, OPEGA and legislatures continue to hear anecdotally about agency frustrations with the cost of IT services and difficulties in getting timely, helpful assistance from OIT. Service-level agreements are an industry standard practice to clarify roles and responsibilities and performance expectations through their establishment. And these are agreements between the IT organization and each agency it serves. These agreements are customer-focused. Generally, they include a commitment to continuous improvement, They clarify roles and responsibilities for both parties, and they establish performance measures for IT services that both parties can monitor and track. And those performance measures might be things like the amount of time it takes to get something taken care of when it's not working, what the service delivery time is for getting something fixed, to larger things, from minor to big things. They can also vary in specificity, and they may include the cost of each IT provided service. And that type of transparency might be helpful based on complaints we've heard. So we are recommending here that OIT should establish service level agreements with each agency. They should be responsible for initiating the process. However, each agency will need to assign a representative with appropriate knowledge and authority to work with OIT on developing agreements. Oversight of the entire endeavor by an entity assigned the governance role we outline in our recommendation 1 could facilitate participation by all agencies in this effort. We also suggest that OIT consider standard effective service level agreements and processes used by other states in developing its own. OIT is funded through an enterprise account entirely, which means that it charges individual agencies for the various services it provides, including DCPDR, project management, and data and analytics efforts. This model serves as a barrier to funding critical, common, statewide IT functions. Cohn-Resnick notes on page 13 of its report, as a result of this model, agencies are required to make their own determinations of business continuity planning and disaster recovery investment in both process and technology support. OIT is only able to provide support levels and capabilities that meet the spending requirements of its customers, many of whom lack the awareness and insight into these areas necessary to make effective business decisions. We recommend that the DAPS Commissioner and State Controller, in conjunction with the CIO, reassess how OIT is funded for core functions and capabilities common to and needed across all state agencies. The Commissioner should report to the Joint Standing Committee on Appropriations and Financial Affairs and State and Local Government Committee on this assessment and whether a change is desirable to ensure sufficient funding for critical common IT functions across state government. Our sixth recommendation relates to a gap that was identified in the project management component of OIT, of Cohn-Resnick's assessment, which is that project managers are not able to provide cost estimates or accurately report on costs during the project. OIT is cannot get access, it knows what its costs are for projects, but it can't get access to the cost of the resources that are coming from the agency it's working on to work on projects. And so it's not in a position to keep customer agencies informed of variances and predicted challenges to project budgets. Budgeting and cost analysis are key components of successful projects, and OIT should work with the DAF's Division of Financial and Personnel Services and the State Controller's Office, as appropriate, to identify and address the challenges impacting their ability to develop accurate project budgets and analyze costs throughout projects. Subsequently, OIT should ensure that project managers are performing regular budget to actual cost analyses and keeping customer agencies informed of budget variances and any challenges consistent with Cohn-Resnick's recommendations on page 24 and 25 of their report. Our last recommendation is that OIT should implement the Cohn-Resnick recommendations that are within its own authority. There were a number of recommendations in the Cohn-Resnick report that OIT can address on its own. And these are summarized on page 11 and deal with business processes, reestablishing the IT audit function, using COVID or some other framework as a standard by which OIT can evaluate its own performance, increasing partnership and outreach, and identifying communication mechanisms to formalize reporting for the BCPDR function and initiatives. A number of data analytics things, such as adopting data governance policies, implementing data assurance tools, and monitoring business performance metrics. And then several specific things in the area of project management, such as consistently conducting project closeout meetings, developing remediation actions in the case of project failures to support customers in solving their problems, developing testing standards for agile projects, and performing post-implementation goal assessments. Overall, we feel that OIT should strengthen its customer service focus and culture to enhance relationships, better understand needs, support improved execution of projects and ongoing technology efforts, and improve the delivery reputation of OIT throughout state government. In addition to considering these recommendations, we recommend that OIT establish a timeline for implementing them or appropriate alternative solutions so as to further mitigate IT-related risks for the state, move toward industry best practices, and improve the services it provides. The CIO should report to this committee and the Joint Standing Committee on State and Local Government on its planned actions in response to these recommendations. And the Joint Standing Committee on State and Local Government should monitor OIT's progress implementing its action plan and advise the GOC of any concerns it has with IT efforts. On page 13 through 16, we have some, OIT's response 17. And then I just want to again thank the management and staff at OIT and DAS for their cooperation and assistance, and for Arthric for their work conducting an independent analysis of OIT's progress. Thank you for any questions that the committee might have. The board and years of the mentioned, it's either address any of the specific questions in that section.
Thank you very much. A lot to digest. Questions? Let me ask a couple of general questions. For instance, with respect to when you talk about ensuring that business impact analyses and subsequent business continuity plans are completed for all agencies, can you give us just a layman's example of what we're trying to make sure doesn't happen?
In a business, we're trying to make sure that if there's a disaster, or there's a power outage, or there's an ice storm, that we know which systems, which state systems in each agency need to be up and running in 24 hours and what it takes to get them, or 2 hours, or which ones can wait, or who can work from home while we get systems in place, or whether there's an alternative server or site to route the information through, so things are running, the state continues to function. And Peter can probably go into more detail than that, but that's sort of that's a layman's explanation.
I'd like me to just
Sure, please. You're welcome.
Thanks.
Where are you from?
I'm from Boston, but I spent a lot of time working in Maine.
Welcome to Maine.
Beth Works, Maine Housing, Savings Bank of Maine. I've worked here quite a bit and I clients. I appreciate this opportunity to be here and speak with you. But the concept of business impact analysis is business focused. What does the agency need? I think prior to a year ago, when the process was changed, OIT was more technology focused. There's all the servers, there's all the workstations. Making a technical decision really isn't not the advised way to do it. It's really to go to the agencies and the programs. What do you need to restore when, and how much data do you need? So it's very, very, very important to do it from a business perspective as opposed to the technical. That's the process that's in place now. It's a question of getting that done because the decisions have to be made every day about technology. Upgrading servers, new data centers, applications are sunset. How much money do you spend on having redundant systems or not redundant? There's a lot of decisions that have to be made. That's why that's very important to do business impact analysis.
And maybe you can comment just in a general overall way. You've made a number of recommendations. I take it some of them are organizational management related. Some of them are going to require additional spending,
Yes.
I assume. Can you talk to that a little bit? And I don't know if this is the focus of your review, but are some of these problems existing because from your perspective the state is not committing enough resources to this department?
Well, I think one of the challenges we explained here are some of these needs can't be justified by an agency or program by program. They're broader,
Right.
Such as spending enough money to have a base level of data analysis. And one agency making a decision, making a case, may not be able to make that case for that expenditure given competing priorities or business continuity. Competing priorities, well, this year we're not going to spend money on this because we have our constituents need this. So this one of the comments is, some of these the funding models don't necessarily support that. The broad-based data analysis capability may require funding at an overall level. And And that's where we get into the conversation about executive level support. I mean, I'm the chairman of this group, and there are a lot of talented people who do a lot of great work in providing methodology and support, but some of those decisions about how quickly you want to recover operations, what kind of data analysis capabilities you want. You know, I was talking earlier about Massachusetts, the EBT card data, this big project to do that. Well, that's not one agency. That's across the whole organization. That's all the whole state. You have to have some basic capability. That's what we talked about, looking at the funding model. We have some executive level support to address those.
Thank you. Representative Stracchio?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, you bringing up the EBT issue, when I read this report,
Sure.
I mean, it made it clearer to me why we have so many issues. The issue isn't, we can write all the laws we want, but if we can't access the data that we need, then somebody could get their EBT card replaced 47 times, and nobody, not every little group not know about it. I mean, because it's hard to understand how that happens, because it sounds like the issues are within agencies, not just agency to agency. I mean, it's a big problem, because we can't even rely on the data that we're getting then.
Okay, no, that was just an example I used. I wasn't, by the way, I didn't spend
No,
any time
I'm
on that.
just, no, but I'm just,
Sure.
you know, it's hard
It is.
for people, the general public, to understand
Sure.
how can things like that happen.
Sure.
But it's easier to understand when we realize that our system is so immature.
Yeah, it's difficult for a small agency, a small program to make the case to spend money on some of these tools. They tend to be expensive. People, process, and the technology. So you're right. That's why it's almost more of a broader level. It's hard to make those decisions one at a time.
Representative Campbell?
Thank you, Senator. On item 5, resources. I know in my committee, OIT basically blew up the budget. And the commissioner was willing to give up positions for enforcement and oversight and guidance at DEP. And we just heard from another commissioner about not having enough resources to even do the reporting requirements. So with OIT's budget going higher and higher, and we don't understand the need, how do we balance this? Our committee just kind of did a Hail Mary and threw its throat, but what's going to become of us as state government? Just some place to manage data and not provide a service to the citizens?
Well, I think that is a huge question, and I know that the IT costs have affected many agency budgets, and it's been a very contentious issue, and I think that's why our recommendation is that they reassess how they're funded for the core functions and things that are common across agencies, and then see if this model, whether a change in the funding model is desirable. I don't know. I think that they would have to get into it, DAFs and the state controller with IT, get into the details of those costs and understand, really pull out what are the things that all agencies need, what are the common core functions that all agencies need no matter what, and maybe that's a separate appropriation, for example. And then there's add-ons that agencies choose to have. So that's one thing that they might consider, but it is a bigger issue than they can just have it answered.
Yes, Representative.
So from your perspective, dealing with all this, is there an opportunity to manage what you need to and reduce the costs?
I can't say whether it would reduce the cost. All states are struggling with the cost of IT services. These are costs that are growing, and it's a new, in some ways, a new area, particularly for some agencies that are less sophisticated than others. Some agencies are much more technologically developed for other reasons, and so it's a learning curve, and that's why having that executive level governance that sort of looks at it more broadly from a statewide or enterprise level, enterprise-wide perspective helps bring everybody up and recognizes the different levels of sophistication and the different types of needs each agency has.
Senator Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. In 2009, which is the 124th legislature, the previous administration, OIT initiated and was responsible for the transition of state police radio changeover, transition, as well as all the departments, including transportation and other agencies. It was woefully inept at doing this. The time frames that were given, the deadlines that were given, OIT did not seem to have the ability to manage that. It was millions of dollars at stake in contracts. Everything from towers, they placed proposed towers around the state, to trying to get bands and other sorts of things to make all this work. It was just a nightmare. And I guess my question is, and it appears that maybe recommendation 6 might deal with that, but it's not crystal clear. My question is, do we feel that OIT has improved significantly from the time of 2009 all the way through, I might add, through the end of the 125th, and I believe into the 126th? Again, probably 2 or 3 times beyond what the proposed contract time was with these vendors.
Well, we didn't look specifically at that project, at the radio project, and I guess I would have to defer to OIT to see if that's the type of project that now would be using the Agile project methodology. But the idea behind going from the old methodology to the Agile methodology is that as a project is proceeding, there are little tiny accomplishments and assessments in a stepped process, and then there's an opportunity to assess and reassess as it goes forward. And so that is a way to contain costs and understand what's going on and take an incremental approach to moving a project forward, so that it doesn't happen at the very end where we say, oh, look, we have this, we've got this big gigantic thing that's not working the way we wanted to. Instead, catch things earlier and address those issues as in the moment.
Well, thank you for that. The difficulty when we relate to this particular project, and I relate to it because it's such a huge project, is that they just didn't, the department at the time, did not seem to have the ability to recognize and foresee problems that most lay people could see. If you had any relationship with the Committee on Criminal Justice, as Krasowski did at the time, and I was on appropriations at the time, and you just see all these grenades going on, these little crises that turn into big crises. So I'm just hoping that there's a better mechanism going on there now than there was.
Certainly that type of issue you're bringing up, which where the business side, with the departments that know about these, like public safety, whether that partnership involved in the project is involved in the project, is the type of thing that would hopefully be addressed more comprehensively with these recommendations.
Thank you. I just want to put that on the record so that we could make reference to what it was.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things that I think is mentioned in passing here is the importance of each of the agencies taking more responsibility for their data and for their business impact assessment. And these are things that I've witnessed in large organization, the battle between who owns the data. And IT obviously has an interest in that from the perspective of whether it's going to, the data model is robust, whether it will allow for different kinds of analysis. Well, it's our data and what we do now works. Or they may think that as long as there's somebody putting information into the application that IT manages, that integrity is just fine, ignoring the accuracy of the data they're putting in, or audits and checks on validity of the information that they've put into the system. Those sorts of things really are things that IT can't do. That's their responsibility. So I think that all of these recommendations are important. There's really essential disciplines of IT that are not fully developed right now. And I'm glad to see that they're working on them in different stages, but certainly wouldn't like to see a serious business continuity issue or a disaster arise right now. Or because of something coming down from the federal level, a significant need to alter some of our applications and find that, well, we didn't solve the data architecture issues. And now we've got that headache and cost to resolve in attempting to add function as well. So I would just note that while various parts of the budget from different agencies were somewhat disgruntled and even alarmed at what the OIT costs were, to ask if they'd like to go back and do it on paper what the costs are. And that we are in reality are stuck right now if we don't address these issues with the real prospect of they're not having functional systems and yet needing to continue the function of their agency. So I think we have to identify those true costs and necessary enterprise-wide responsibilities that the state has to get in order. And we've been shortchanging for a while, which is why the department has not kept up on all these and not having to focus on those responsibilities in the agencies that are their part of a functional IT infrastructure. All of those things have, I think, been let slide as we've had difficult budget times in the state, and we really need to figure out what it's worth to get this back together. These point out the shortcomings, and I think a brief assessment of, given these shortcomings, what the costs of any real challenges to those failings or lack of shortcomings would be an eye-opener for a lot of agencies. And I don't know if that's something that would be practical to assess right now, or whether a lot of further work that might not be worth the effort to be required. But I suspect that this is one of the places where we're coasting with our fingers crossed. And it's time to stop doing that.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Campbell.
Just a quick one. You mentioned redundancy. Whether it be an effort, department to department, or as hardware, software. When I was here the first time, prior to leaving in 2000, the legislature was still running on the wang. Do we have that kind of problems that might save some money?
Well, I think there's facilitating moving towards redundancy within systems as well as cross-site. It's called cross-site, so if something happened in one data center, the data center would kick in. But I know that's a work in process. I believe there are some legacy applications that aren't included in that redundancy at this point, based on our review. But that's getting back to the right process is to do the business impact analysis, and then to look back at the technology as opposed to starting with the technology, because it's very difficult to make those decisions. OIT can't make those decisions, as you said. Senator Johnson said, they can't make it on their own. They really have to have the input to the business areas. But yeah, and that's part of our, as we talked about here, some unmitigated risks. There are some. But it's a question of priorities and where do you spend your money, and having to do that business impact focus to really make those decisions is critical.
I think one of the things you talked at some length about was the disaster situation and trying to prioritize what we need to get up quickly and how to do it. Yes. You haven't talked a lot in here about cybersecurity, maybe because that's outside perhaps the scope of your work, but could you address that a little bit? Do you have a sense about cybersecurity and what changes we might need to make in order to further secure our information, both from attacks to wreak havoc with it, but also to just steal information?
Well, that's a good question. I know there's been a big focus. There's been security, physical security, online security, application, number of levels. We really didn't do a full cyber security, but something our firm does a lot in. That hadn't been the focus here. And one of the areas that's really growing, we talk about business continuity planning, is the FFIEC, which regulates banks and financial agencies. They will have real focus now on cyber resiliency, because if there is a disaster, then times an organization is most vulnerable. A lot's been done in that area, but we really didn't cover the details of the cybersecurity assessment.
Thank you. Other questions? Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that, raising that issue as well, Senator Keats. I would hope that responsibility for progress on that, the data, network, physical, and social engineering security concerns for IT would be one of those responsibilities at the executive level, enterprise-wide sponsorship and governance of this, because it is one of those things that you can't afford to just have where that data resides the weakest link in another agency become how somebody got at what was more critical in another agency. That's the sort of vulnerabilities that would exist. So I don't see any mention of exactly what responsibilities are part of that, including security, but I would hope that would go there.
Any further questions for this topic here? Well, thank you very much, and I know that Mr. Smith is here, and thank you for being here, and we welcome your initial reaction to the report today. We just for everybody's, to remind everybody, this is the presentation of the report today, and traditionally we follow that with a public hearing at a later date, and I'm sure we'll do that in this case as well. But we would like for Director Smith, is that the correct term, sir?
Chief Information Officer.
Chief Information Officer Smith to come and give us your initial thought, if you would.
Of course. Good morning, members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to respond. We have put a response in there, and as you'll see from our response, we agree with these findings. These findings are not surprising to us. We have a lot of challenges. The challenges are both on the funding side and on the agencies, helping the agencies find the resources to do this work. I don't want to give any impression here that the agencies aren't cooperating. They cooperate completely, but we ask so much of them. We do things like we have to do software upgrades required through the industry, like Windows upgrade, or IE11 that can take 6 or 8 months of agency resources that are cost that just are not moving the organization forward. The industry is sort of trapped in that, right? We have to keep that. You have to keep your software up to date because of cyber concerns and things like that. So we very much understand where the agencies are and how we can help them. Although it wasn't a part of this particular review, I will say on the cybersecurity, the governor has authorized us to establish a committee, which we have, Information Security Protection Committee. I can't remember the exact title, but we bring in both resources from the state and from the universities and from National Guard and from Department of Homeland Security to come together and share best practices and say, how do we protect information? I will say, like everything else, there's an expense associated with cybersecurity. I would candidly say Maine is sort of in the middle of the pack among states on cybersecurity. I think we're doing okay. There's a lot more we could do. There are some states that are really leading the pack. Michigan, Pennsylvania, putting a lot of dollars into that. And so we're doing the things to protect our information that we can. We need to do more on preventive measures and understand our attacks. We get attacked about 2 million times a day. 2 million attacks on us.
2 million?
2 million, yeah, a day. And that's common. All the states would say that. That's common for all the states, right? So what happens is there are automated systems that go out and are probing, right? It's not someone sitting at a keyboard doing it. It isn't just automated systems. We get about 2 million a day. We get about 15 a day where we have to rebuild some of the workstations because they got infected. So these are real costs and real expenses. And when people talk about it, South Carolina getting a breach a couple of years ago, we think that they publicly stated that it cost them about $24 million to recover from. So, an average breach is about $3 million, but when you get into those type of breaches, when I think they lost 3.5 million Social Security numbers to get to that. So, it will cost us to improve our defenses, but I think it might be a cost avoidance.
Senator Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not quite sure how to tackle this, but going along the lines of Senator Diamond's comments, we had a very extensive study on Homeland Security, on Maine emergency management, how we were going to deal with any natural disasters or man-made disasters or somebody coming here to cause any kind of a disaster. And part of that dealt with Portland and Fairchild, different major industries that we had. Not only were we concerned about how do we evacuate people, but also how do we get them back? How do we get the companies back to working fast? My committee, I've been there from the beginning and I'm still there. We ask every year, go to IT and ask, what's happened to the money that's appropriated for communications so that we have departments that can actually talk to each other? State police especially, that was the thing that highlighted. We haven't been able to get an answer. And it's not that it's because we haven't asked, or we haven't been tough at asking. I'm pretty tough at asking, and so is my committee pretty tough at asking these questions. But what we're doing with cybersecurity, we've never been able to get responses to a lot of these questions, no matter how much we've asked. And I'm happy to hear it being discussed today because I still think it's a major hole in some of our public safety stuff, which Fairchild gets hit by a hurricane, we can't evacuate people, that's one thing. But to get that company back up and running and get the cybersecurity safety features and stuff like that still haven't been addressed. Well, I apologize if you haven't got the information. Please come to me and I'll get you the information. Or our CISO, I don't know if you work with Victor Chakravarty, who's our Chief Information Security Officer. We publish what we do, we publish what the risks are, so we can certainly get you that information. As far as the broader statewide, that's a little bit beyond the spectrum of the executive branch IT organization, but I will say I'm part of the Maine Cybersecurity Cluster, which was an organization started by the University of Southern Maine, includes the National Guard, MEMA, area companies, not Fairchild, Fairchild's not on it, and private industry. We were looking at statewide, what can we do to, what are our best practices about cybersecurity? What can we do to build the best defenses? And if I might just continue, I'm pretty sure that all that originally came out of the initial study that showed us all our glaring faults, and that we tried to remedy most of them through MEMA and through other agencies. It's just the communication part, the computer part that's been giving us a lot of bit. Well, so I just want to bring that up.
Thank you. And I will certainly get you the information if you like.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Sanderson?
Thank you for coming today. I really appreciate your responses to the recommendations that are in the report here. And I initially, first, I want to comment that I'm very pleased to see how under many of these you already have taken the initiative before the report came out officially and have all these things completed, or they're already in process, or they're planned. When it comes to the planned things, is there a timeline? Do you guys have a timeline on when you expect to be able to address the rest of these points that are in the planned stage now?
Thank you, Representative. I'd say on some we do and on some we don't. One of the recommendations was more executive level governance, oversight of IT. Conceptually, we have an idea of the time frame on that. I do not have that time frame yet. We'll have to work with, obviously, the governor's office and other areas. So some of the things were limited on what we can put out for a time frame, and one's under our control.
Thank you.
Thank you. To follow up on Representative Sanderson's questions here, do you think, I don't know when we're going to have a public hearing, but I suspect it's going to be at least a month. Do you think you might be able to provide us at that next meeting with at least where you are on a timeline at that point in time?
Certainly.
Thank you. Other questions for Senator Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In your response on item 3, page 15. And I'm curious, I guess, about two things. To what degree these multi-agency data governance committee members are responsible for and able to represent their departments in the responsibility for the data and maintenance of that data's integrity and use of it. But I'm also, and perhaps this would in part answer it if you were to inform us what the charge and authority is of each of these, the working group and the committee that have been formed. We might understand how that's going to actually address the recommendation.
Yes, thank you, Senator. This committee really is just been formed recently and was formed in reaction to these findings. And what we've done is, together with the Office of Program Management and OIT, we brought together all the agencies and said, how do we build a roadmap to data sharing? As was mentioned the presentation here, OIT needs to own the data security and the data governance. How do you store data? How do you retrieve data? All that stuff. The agencies themselves will work to how do they share data amongst agencies. So we're, I think, facilitators on that. I'm not sure I would say that we're in a position to dictate that stuff, and we probably wouldn't have that knowledge anyway. But we're trying to put together a facility to make it easier for organizations to share data. But of course, as you mentioned, I mean, we're trapped in the past on the data, right? We have data that's stored in different mediums, different programs, different databases that in some ways really make it hard for agencies to share data. So we've got to solve that problem as we look forward to this.
Yes, sir.
So I would hope that further information about the charges of the Data Governance Committee and the working group on the data integrity inventory could be provided to us when we next see you. But I guess I understand, of course, what you're saying about the stuck in the past. And the thing is, we'll never get to a better future unless we also have a vision of what that is or should be. And I would hope that out of this, that part of OIT's responsibility is identifying, given information about business functions and the importance of kinds of data to that. And someone in that department that is responsible for data, earnest discussions with them about more appropriate hierarchies or relationships or modes in which the information necessary is captured so that it might be more useful.
Yes, and we certainly see our responsibility to help with the data warehousing of that, and where's the industry going, where's the future going,
and more flexible.
Share data. Yeah, more flexible, but I will again caution, these are expensive things. The last company I was at, we put a project together just to get to a common customer, right? Just how do we find the common customer and everything? It was a $25 million project. It was just for one entity, so it's that past where things were stored differently, data was stored differently in the past, and each agency would have its own definition. Now we say we've got to share that. How do we share that? But on the plus side, the tools are getting much better on this stuff.
But it's also a case where, let's say that there's a need to go out and put together a new application functionality. Well, you can either just look at, gee, what do we have to change in order to achieve this? Or if you've, along the way, made some assessments and have a vision of what you'd like to head towards, that this would be just as cost-effectively able to implement some of those changes because of what has to be modified and touched at the time towards that more useful model. That's the time to actually implement it. But you won't know that or get there if you haven't spent a little bit of effort looking at where you want to head. And I think that that is a absolutely core responsibility of OIT to come up with some of those important recommendations that provide lower costs and flexibility that the state needs.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Stein, I just have one more question, if I could. One of the recommendations involves how the budget for OIT gets presented, and I think what I heard anyway was there's some kind of agency-wide or system-wide costs you have which are not necessarily easily allocable to each of the agencies, and I think they're suggesting a little bit of different approach to budgeting. Do you have any comments yet about that?
No, that's correct, and we had, even prior to this review, we have submitted something to the governor's office and to Commissioner Daffs about how we could look at OIT budget, OIT expenses differently. In other words, have their enterprise funding. So it's just as the senator started to mention, if an agency wants to build something, but they have X amount of money, and we say, if we put a little more money and we build it the right way, then we'll all be able to share that information with that. And things like cybersecurity, disaster recovery, I have no enterprise funding for that. No enterprise funding. We hired a disaster recovery person. I have no enterprise funding for that. So we've submitted something, thanks, the governor encouraged us to. We've submitted something that tries to segregate enterprise approach to what we have to do to be a functioning organization from a variable cost, which is agency X needs to build up this program. So we have set forth a proposal.
Anything else? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, thank you.
Thank you
for being with us this morning. And we look forward to seeing you at public hearing.
I guess based on what we've discussed, might be a possible way to deal with number 3, and that might be a quick discussion. If you'd like to do
Sure.
that.
Number 3 on the agenda, the GOC consideration of a new request for OPEGA review of certain matters related to the World Acadian Congress.
Behind tab 3 in your book, we actually received requests from two individual requests, one from Representative Cooper and another from Representative Martin and Representative Saucier, relating to what came out in the press about potential actions on the part of the governor that led to the dismissal of the director of an organization. I think you're probably all familiar with the issues that were brought to light through the press there, and in both of these requests they're asking for an OPEGA review of that particular matter. In particular, Representative Cooper would like to see our current project that you have us on with regard to Goodwill Hinckley expanded to include this as well. And there is Representative Cooper submitted some additional written testimony with her main points and concerns that I believe you have that was distributed to you this morning. So those documents are there. My thoughts on this are that I would rather not expand our current review that we have ongoing. We are working very hard to try to report out to you on that on September 8th. And adding this to it would definitely make that not a possibility. So it would be my preference for this committee to maybe either tackle this as an idea about a separate project for OPEGA and potentially maybe even wait until we've reported out to you on September 8th to decide what you might want to do about these requests. Would be my pitch on that.
I just heard a question if we need a motion. I don't think we do. Is that acceptable to everybody that we defer any discussion of this issue until the September 8th meeting at the earliest? And I did have a chance to speak with Representative Cooper, and we do have her letter in the file which expresses her concerns, and we can certainly take this up at a later time. Senator Dunn.
Mr. Chairman, did you say until the September meeting?
Well, we could certainly revisit it at the September meeting. We may or may not want to deal with it even then, but not deal with it.
In terms of expectations, I would hope that we wouldn't think of doing it on the September meeting, but that's just caution.
We will leave it unassigned, if you will. It's not really tabled, and we'll take it at the appropriate time. Is that acceptable to everyone? Good.
So that was my less than 15 minutes.
Good work.